Have you ever noticed that the moment you start asking question after question, something shifts in her eyes? There's this subtle withdrawal, this almost imperceptible pulling back, and suddenly you're not having a conversation anymore. You're conducting an interview, and she's not engaged. She's enduring. You can feel it, can't you? That sinking realization that you've somehow turned an exciting moment of possibility into something that feels more like a job application. You're trying so hard to show interest, to be the good guy, to demonstrate that you care about getting to know her. But instead of drawing her closer, you're watching her drift further away with every well-intentioned question. And here's the thing that nobody tells you, the thing that goes against everything you've been taught about dating and connection. Sometimes the very act of trying to know someone pushes them further from you. There's something Machiavelli understood about power that applies far beyond the political courts of Renaissance Italy, something that cuts right to the heart of human interaction and the dance of attraction. He knew that power is not taken, it's perceived, that the person who needs something least holds all the cards, that mystery and restraint create magnetism in ways that eagerness and transparency never can. And when you're sitting across from someone you're attracted to, firing off question after question like you're checking boxes on a compatibility quiz, you're broadcasting something loud and clear. I need you to fill this silence. I need you to validate me. I need something from you. And in that need, in that reaching, you've already lost the very thing you were trying to create. The user prompt is empty, so I cannot provide a summary in the user's language. However, based on the thinking block provided, here is a summary. Architected narrative framework exploring psychological dynamics and authentic connection. Good start. I've created the hook with a relatable scenario and introduced the Machiavellian concept in a non-manipulative way. Now I need to build out the narrative, going deeper into why this dynamic happens and what's really going on psychologically. I should continue with why questioning creates this dynamic, the psychology of attraction and power, what authentic conversation looks like, how to shift from interviewing to genuine interaction, the deeper insights about vulnerability, authenticity, and connection. Let me continue in continuous prose format. Think about the last time someone interviewed you. Maybe it was a job interview. Maybe it was a doctor taking your medical history. Maybe it was a bureaucrat filling out forms. How did it feel? Probably transactional, clinical, one-sided. You were the subject and they were the investigator. There was a clear power differential and you were on the receiving end of it. Now imagine bringing that same energy into a moment that's supposed to be about mutual discovery, about spark and chemistry and the delicious uncertainty of two people finding each other interesting. The interviewing dynamic doesn't just kill attraction because it's boring, though it certainly is that. It kills attraction because it fundamentally misunderstands what attraction is. Attraction is not born from information. It's born from mystery, from the space between words, from what's implied rather than stated, from the tension of not quite knowing. When you ask her where she's from, what she does, where she went to school, how many siblings she has, you think you're building connection. You think you're showing interest. And on a purely logical level, sure, you're gathering data. But attraction doesn't operate on logic. It operates on feeling, on instinct, on those ancient parts of your brain that light up not when someone asks you predictable questions, but when someone makes you feel something you didn't expect to feel. Here's what most people don't realize about conversation. The best ones don't feel like exchanges of information at all. They feel like collaborative creation, like two people building something together in real time that neither of them could have built alone. There's a flow to them, a momentum, a sense that you're both playing the same game even though nobody explained the rules. You're not taking turns presenting your credentials to each other. You're dancing. And you can't dance if one person is standing still with a clipboard asking the other person to demonstrate their moves. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But what he really understood was the nature of power and perception. The prince who needed to be loved was weak. The prince who was complete unto himself, who could walk away, who had his own kingdom secure, that prince was magnetic. People wanted to be near him not because he chased their approval, but because he didn't need it. And in the context of conversation, in the context of attraction, This principle transforms into something subtle but profound. The person who is comfortable in silence, who doesn't need to fill every gap with another question, who can simply be present without grasping, that person becomes infinitely more interesting than the one who's trying so hard to be interesting. You know this feeling already, even if you've never named it. You've been in conversations where you felt like you were doing all the work, carrying the weight, pulling words out of the other person. And you've been in conversations where you forgot to check your phone, forgot what time it was, forgot that you had anywhere else to be because you were so absorbed in the moment. What was the difference? In the first scenario, someone was trying too hard. In the second, both people were simply being. No agenda, no interview, no performance. Just two people present to each other in a way that felt rare and real. The psychology behind this runs deeper than most people realize. Attachment theory tells us that secure attachment is formed not through constant questioning and probing, but through attunement, through being present and responsive without being intrusive. When you interview someone, you're being intrusive. You're asking them to perform their identity for you, to package themselves into neat answers that you can evaluate. But when you share an observation, tell a story, make a joke, offer a perspective, you're inviting them into your world instead of interrogating them about theirs. You're creating an opportunity for genuine resonance rather than surface level fact gathering. And here's where it gets fascinating. The questions you ask reveal more about you than they do about her. When you ask what she does for work as your opening question, you're revealing that you value status and profession. When you ask where she's traveled, you're revealing that you equate experience with virtue. When you ask about her relationship history, you're revealing your insecurity. Each question is a window into your priorities, your anxieties, your need for certain kinds of validation. And she's not stupid. She can feel all of this underneath your words. She can sense the neediness, the evaluation, the way you're trying to determine if she fits into some pre-existing template you have for who you want. But what if you approach the interaction differently? What if instead of asking her where she's from, you told a story about a time you got lost in a city you were visiting and ended up having the best meal of your life in a restaurant you would have never found otherwise? What if instead of asking what she does for work, you shared an observation about how strange it is that we spend more time with our coworkers than our families, but we're supposed to pretend it's just professional? What if instead of asking about her interest, you expressed genuine curiosity about something in your environment, something you're both experiencing together in that moment? The uncomfortable truth is that most men have been taught to treat conversation like a job interview because that's the safest option. Questions are safe. They put the burden of performance on the other person. They allow you to hide behind the role of interested listener instead of risking being interesting yourself. But safety and attraction are inversions of each other. The safe choice is almost always the choice that kills spark. Risk, vulnerability, the willingness to say something that might land wrong or reveal something true about yourself. That's where connection lives. Machiavelli understood something else too, that fortune favors the bold, but boldness must be strategic. It's not about being reckless or domineering. It's about understanding the nature of power and presence. When you ask a question, you're giving away your power. You're saying, I need you to fill this space. I need you to give me something to respond to. But when you make a statement, share an observation, tell a story, you're owning the space. You're saying, here's something from my world, take it or leave it. And paradoxically, this makes people want to take it. They want to enter your world because you're not desperately trying to enter theirs. Think about the people you find most captivating in your life. Are they the ones who ask you lots of questions? Or are they the ones who share perspectives that make you think, tell stories that make you feel, offer observations that shift how you see the world? The magnetic people are not interrogators. They're revealers. They reveal pieces of themselves, pieces of how they see the world, and in doing so, they create space for you to do the same. Not because you have to, not because you're being interviewed, but because you want to. Because what they've shared has sparked something in you that wants to be expressed. And maybe that's the real story here. Maybe the reason interviewing fails is not just because it's boring or transactional, though it is both of those things. Maybe it fails because it fundamentally misunderstands what intimacy is. Intimacy is not knowing facts about someone. You can know someone's birthday, their job title, their hometown, their favorite movie, and still be complete strangers. Intimacy is the feeling of being truly seen and accepted. It's the sense that someone is tracking not just your words, but your essence, your energy, your way of being in the world. And you can't create that through interrogation. You create it through presence, through vulnerability, through the willingness to be yourself so fully that it gives the other person permission to be themselves too. Here's what happens in your brain when you shift from interviewing to genuine presence. Your mirror neurons start firing differently. Instead of being in evaluation mode, constantly processing information and trying to formulate the next question, you drop into a state of genuine curiosity and openness. You become attuned to subtle cues, body language, tone, energy that tell you far more than any question ever could. You start to notice when she lights up, when she leans in, when she becomes more animated. And you follow that energy instead of following some predetermined list of topics you think you should cover. This is where Machiavelli's concept of virtue comes in. Virtue, in his philosophy, wasn't about virtue in the moral sense. It was about effectiveness, about the ability to read a situation accurately and respond with precision. It was about being adaptable rather than rigid, strategic rather than desperate. When you interview someone, you're being rigid. You've decided in advance what information you need, and you're going to get it no matter what the natural flow of conversation suggests. But when you approach conversation with virtue, you're reading the room, reading the person, reading the moment, and adjusting accordingly. You're not attached to outcomes. You're engaged with what is. And this is where people get it wrong about Machiavelli. They think being Machiavellian means being manipulative, calculating in a sinister way. But what it really means is being clear-eyed about human nature, about power dynamics, about what actually works versus what we're told should work. The Machiavellian approach to conversation isn't about tricks or tactics. It's about understanding that people are drawn to strength, to self-possession, to someone who doesn't need their approval. It's about recognizing that the person who cares less has more power, not because they're cruel or cold, but because they're complete. They have their own life, their own interests, their own world, and they're inviting you to join it rather than abandoning their world to join yours. You can feel the difference, can't you? Between someone who has their own gravity and someone who's orbiting yours desperately. The person with their own gravity is calm. They're not rushing to fill silences. They're not anxiously monitoring your reactions to see if they're doing it right. They're just there, present, solid. And that solidity is incredibly attractive because it's so rare. Most people are anxious, reaching, trying to be liked, trying to say the right thing. But the person who's comfortable in their own skin, who can let a pause linger, who can change the subject when something isn't landing instead of forcing it, who can be playful without being try-hard, that person stands out like a lighthouse in a sea of flickering candles. The psychology behind this runs even deeper. Cognitive dissonance theory tells us that we value most what we have to work for. When you hand someone everything on a platter through constant questions that make conversation easy for them, you're inadvertently lowering your perceived value. But when you create a situation where they have to contribute, where they have to meet you halfway, where the conversation is genuinely collaborative rather than you doing all the work, you're creating the conditions for them to invest, and people become attached to what they invest in. This doesn't mean being difficult or deliberately withholding. It means being genuinely engaged with the conversation as it unfolds, rather than trying to control it through questions. It means trusting that if there's genuine compatibility, the conversation will flow naturally. And if it doesn't, if you find yourself doing all the work, maybe that's valuable information too. Maybe the person isn't actually that interested, or maybe there isn't the chemistry you hoped for, and the interview format was just masking that reality by giving you both roles to play instead of revealing whether you actually enjoy each other's company. Here's the uncomfortable truth that changes everything. When you interview someone, you're trying to create attraction through information gathering, but attraction doesn't care about information. Attraction is created through state, through emotion, through the feelings that arise in someone's body when they're near you. And those feelings are not created by questions. They're created by presence, by confidence, by the way you inhabit space, by your ability to be relaxed and genuine, by moments of shared laughter or unexpected insight, or comfortable silence. Think about the last time you felt genuinely attracted to someone. Was it because they asked you great questions, or was it because of how they made you feel? Maybe they told a story that made you laugh. Maybe they made an observation that showed they saw the world in an interesting way. Maybe they were comfortable with a silence that would have made someone else anxious. Maybe they teased you gently and you felt seen in a way that felt playful rather than judgmental. Maybe they were passionate about something and that passion was infectious. None of these moments came from questions. They came from authentic expression. The Machiavellian insight here is that people don't want to be studied. They want to be experienced. When you ask questions, you're studying. You're the anthropologist observing the native. But when you engage authentically, when you share yourself and create space for them to share themselves without demanding it, you're experiencing each other. You're both present to the moment rather than one person extracting information from the other. And here's what happens when you stop interviewing. The conversation becomes unpredictable. It goes places neither of you expected. There are surprises, detours, moments of genuine discovery that feel earned rather than extracted. You learn things about each other not because you asked, but because they naturally emerged in the context of real exchange. And those things mean more because they were given freely rather than handed over on demand. This is about understanding the difference between being interested and being interesting. Everyone tells you to be interested in the other person, to ask questions, to listen. And yes, listening matters. Presence matters. But you can't just be a receptacle for someone else's story. You have to bring something to the table. You have to be someone worth talking to, not just someone who's good at asking questions. And the way you demonstrate that is not through your interrogation skills, but through your perspective, your experiences, your way of seeing the world. Machiavelli wrote that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Therefore, one must be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. In conversation, this translates to a balance between cleverness and strength. The cleverness to read the situation, to understand when to speak and when to be silent, to know when to push forward and when to pull back, and the strength to be yourself without apology, to own your perspective, to not need the other person's approval, to feel okay about who you are. The questions you don't ask create more space than the questions you do. The stories you tell reveal more than the information you gather. The silence you're comfortable with speaks louder than the nervous chatter you use to fill it. And the person you are when you're not trying to be impressive is infinitely more attractive than the person you become when you're working too hard. So what does this look like in practice? It looks like walking into an interaction without an agenda. It looks like being genuinely curious about the moment rather than trying to extract a predetermined set of facts. It looks like sharing an observation about the music playing, or the way the light is hitting the wall, or something absurd you noticed earlier that day. It looks like telling a story because it's funny or interesting, not because you think it will impress anyone. It looks like asking a question only when you're genuinely curious about something they've already revealed, not as a way to fill space or hit some invisible checklist. It looks like being willing to let the conversation end if it's not flowing naturally, rather than desperately trying to keep it on life support with question after question. It looks like trusting that if there's real chemistry, real compatibility, you won't have to work so hard. The conversation will have its own life. And if you do have to work that hard, maybe that's valuable information. Maybe the fit isn't there, and that's okay. Better to know now than to interview your way into something that was never quite right. The deepest insight here is that you can't create connection by trying to create connection. You can only create the conditions for connection and then see what emerges. The condition is not interrogation. The condition is presence. The condition is being so fully yourself that you create space for the other person to be fully themselves. And when two people are being fully themselves in the same space, without performance, without agenda, without need, that's when something real can happen. You've probably experienced this already. In those rare conversations where time disappeared and you forgot you were supposed to be nervous or impressive. You were just there. You were just talking. You were just laughing. And it felt easy in a way that felt almost suspicious because we've been taught that connection requires work, requires strategy, requires knowing the right questions to ask. But the truth is, connection requires the opposite. It requires letting go of strategy. It requires trusting yourself enough to just be present and see what happens. This is the way to talk to women without chasing, or more accurately, this is the way to talk to anyone in a way that honors both of you. Stop treating the interaction like a transaction where you input questions and hope to output attraction. Stop giving away your power by making yourself the servant of the conversation. Stop hiding behind the safety of the interviewer role because you're afraid to be seen. Start bringing yourself to the interaction. Start trusting that who you are is enough. Start sharing instead of extracting. Start creating moments instead of collecting information. Start being present to what's actually happening instead of following some script you think you're supposed to follow. And start recognizing that the person who's comfortable not feeling every silence, who can let a moment breathe, who doesn't need constant validation, that's the person who becomes unforgettable. Because at the end of the day, Machiavelli understood what so many people miss. Power is not about dominance or control. It's about self-possession. It's about being so secure in yourself that you don't need anything from anyone else. And paradoxically, that's when people want to give you everything. Not because you asked for it, not because you extracted it through clever questioning, but because your completeness draws them in, because your presence creates space for them. Because in a world of people trying desperately to be liked, you're simply being yourself. And that is the rarest and most magnetic thing of all.